This is the Startup Tri-Valley podcast, featuring in-depth conversations with the leaders who are making the Tri-Valley the go-to ecosystem for science-based startups. I'm Yolanda Finchenko from Startup Tri-Valley. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the pod Luis Martinez, PhD, Senior Venture Associate with Capital Factory, a Daybreak Labs advisor, a personal friend, a fellow Trinity Tiger. Luis, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity to get a chance to chat. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time and super excited about not only the community that you've helped build, but also this incredible platform. So really looking forward to our time together in our conversation.
Well, thank you. So let's start off with a story I'm not even sure I've heard, which is
Okay.
what inspired you to pursue a career in venture capital, and how did you land at Capital Factory? You're, like me, a chemist. So
So that's a really interesting story. Let's frame this slightly. Let's get to the chase. A career is measured over decades, and someone's path can be nonlinear. And let's just frame that to say that this is going to be a long journey that has quite a nonlinear path. So my apologies for those of you that are kind of like tuning in, are like, oh my God, I can't wait to start in venture capital. I want to do venture capital like in the next 3 years. Like, it took me like 25. So that's sort of one of the take home lessons. Um, we need to go back actually earlier than 25 years. When I was a graduate student at Harvard, I was really fortunate to be involved in a discovery that we ended up patenting. It was a phenomenal sort of achievement. It was really great to kind of like be part of that process as a graduate student. So I was part of the patenting process and the disclosure at Harvard, and then we had a licensee, and so it was about licensing that technology out, seeing it to scale, seeing it being built to scale. So that was sort of a completely eye-opening experience for me. I'm trained as a synthetic organic chemist. I'm a synthetic methodologist is my training. To see your method and what you developed as a catalyst being built on, being produced on a multi-ton scale and then being used by pharmaceutical companies around the world, like, that's super cool. That's like really, really
right?
cool. And so that got me excited about other possibilities that didn't include kind of traditional kind of pharmaceutical chemicals kind of research working for industry or academic opportunities. So at the time, in sort of the late 90s, there was a number of consulting firms that were looking to hire PhDs, because consulting firms at the time were opening in sort of that iris of the kind of advisory that they were getting from their early hires, and stepping out and hiring PhDs in addition to the traditional kind of MBAs and JDs. So I turned down a postdoc at Berkeley. Later, I found out that was probably not the best choice, but regardless, I turned down a postdoc at Berkeley to it was funny because quick aside, so they're like, hey, I turned down this postdoc at Berkeley, and they're like, you know what that postdoc is, right? I'm like, yeah, it's some named postdoc, blah blah blah, not a big deal. They're like, it means they were looking at you for a job. And I was like, oh, it's like, yeah, like if not at Cal, it would have been at another UC school. It's like, oh yeah, maybe
We'd
that
be
was a mistake.
incubating your company here, Luis.
Anyway, I turned that down. Because I was interviewing at management consulting firms, and I had this wonderful offer with a very small boutique management consulting firm that only specialized in biotech and medical devices. So it was a Boston-based firm. At the time, it was one of only maybe two companies in the world that were doing the work that they did. And their specialty was corporate communications and investor relations, specifically for biotech and medical device companies. And what was interesting about that firm at the time is that they felt it was super important for them to hire PhD level scientists on their team, because if they were going to be working with early stage biotech or late stage medical device companies, they needed to understand the science at the same level that the scientists had at the companies. And so I was part of this kind of like cohort of our own kind of egghead PhDs that kind of were assigned to every consulting project. And so it was an incredible learning experience for me. I kind of consider that my MBA. Was the number two guy in our West Coast office, helped sort of support our clients west of the Mississippi, built our own kind of practice as we did that. It built out the work on the West Coast. Spent a lot of time on airplanes, spent a lot of time talking to everything from two guys in a lab rat to publicly traded medical device and pharma companies, doing investor relations for both public and private companies, corporate communications, and then the more traditional kind of management consulting work that we got engaged to. That was exciting. That was super great for me. It was at that point I was like, wow, this VC thing sounds like really interesting. Is maybe the next step of what I'll do after the consulting firm. But detour. Turns out my father took ill and I needed to go back to my hometown of El Paso, Texas. And what started as the conversation of, hey, like I want to be in town, like, do you need a lab to be taught or, a section of organic chemistry to be taught? Became well, I'm not saying we have a job, but if you were going to be a faculty member and we had a role, would you take it? And so I kind of committed career suicide again and sort of left management consulting and business and sort of VC to go become a university professor. So I became a professor of chemistry at the University of Texas of El Paso, which is my hometown. Got a chance to help be part of, not only teaching graduate students and teaching undergrads and not only writing grants and developing, technologies. That's where my second patent comes out of. But also helping build a department, helping build a PhD program, helping build a region. So that was super exciting. Because I had had this tech transfer experience prior to my academic role, I started advising our tech transfer office. They were just beginning to sort of have technologies and patents and stuff like that. So I helped them license their first three technologies out of that office. And then because I wasn't busy enough, a couple of buddies we had all found ourselves in the same area, co-founded another consulting firm that I was a co-founder for. And we worked with small businesses and startups working that had up to $1 million worth of revenue. And in addition to that, we also worked with Los Alamos National Labs and Sandia National Labs to help do due diligence for accredited investors. So, these are investors that may not know the technology super well or kind of have to take someone else's word for it, that the TAM is really what it is or the opportunity is really what it is. And so we were engaged on a sort of case by case, to come on in and do due diligence for investors as they sort of evaluate those opportunities. Did that until about 2009 or so. So I've had the experience of not only launching a company, but also winding a company down when no one can afford you anymore. And then left my academic role to go become a senior scientist at the Scripps Research Institute in Jupiter, Florida. So it was an exciting time in Florida at the time. There was a number of sort of research institutions that were setting up their East Coast presence in Florida. The Burnham Institute was setting up a presence there. Scripps Research Institute was there. Torrey Pines was setting up an institute there. So it was very exciting in that kind of economic downturn, kind of the excitement happening around biotech, specifically in Florida. Was there and then went off to go teach at another small college. And then about 13 years ago, my wife got an opportunity to relocate and become a distinguished professor here in San Antonio, Texas. And she very wisely chose not to move to San Antonio without her husband. So I'm very grateful for her to do that. But they weren't looking for another organic chemist. They already had plenty of those on their team. But they had just opened up an entrepreneurship center and were looking for a new director. So I shifted and became now professor of innovation and entrepreneurship. Also helped manage that tech transfer office as well, and built a university entrepreneurship center. And it was exciting. It was a great decade I spent there. Helped students primarily launch their first businesses. We launched over 60 student startups in the decade that I was there. Those companies then went off to raise over $60 million of dilutive capital. And we've had one successful exit from that kind of generation that were there.
Amazing.
Helped launch a mentor program, an accelerator program, a venture competition, an internship program, got deeply involved in kind of the tech entrepreneurial ecosystem here in San Antonio, Texas, that I helped build. So through that, got engaged with investors, got engaged with entrepreneurial support organizations similar to Daybreak Labs, started mentoring in a range of kind of programs. At that time, Techstars had a Techstars Cloud here in San Antonio, so I started mentoring nationally with Techstars through the Techstars Cloud program. Been mentoring with them now for about 8 years. Got connected through that with Mass Challenge in Boston, started mentoring with them as well, and then started mentoring kind of overall. So my origin sort of comes as sort of like a management consultant, and then my own consulting, and then a mentor. About 3 years ago, left Trinity and was looking for something bigger impact and bigger scale to do for my next gig. And at the time, Capital Factory was looking for a venture lead in San Antonio. And so they said, hey, look, you've helped build this ecosystem in San Antonio. You know what it's like to have companies get started. You've been mentoring with Capital Factory for a while, so we know that, like, you don't give bad advice. Would you be interested in joining our team and being on the venture side? And I couldn't think of anything bigger impact and bigger scale than working across the country and working within the state of Texas and helping companies to go big and go fast. And so 25 years later, here I am again, now working in VC. And so, my approach and how I think about VC is that while I have been an operator, and so I do have that kind of operational experience of having co-founded a thing, my thing though, it was a consulting firm, and my background is in consulting. So it really is from a consulting perspective of how can you add value, where it's not about you, it really is about the client. It really is you about the founder. So it's a very kind of founder focused orientation in the way in which I kind of evaluate the kind of engagements and investments that we make. So that's first. Second is that I've been mentoring for over 25 years and consulting for over 25 years. So that's another aspect of this. It's very kind of mentory-like, consulting-like, in the kind of ways in which we engage and like lean into the companies that we work with. I think there's a misunderstanding by many founders and some VCs that the only value for investors is their capital.
Right.
And that's important. You need that for oxygen, but really it's the investment of time and effort that actually in some cases is more impactful than the kind of capital that someone can write into you. So I'm kind of approaching this from the perspective of investment means, yes, capital investment, but also means investment in time and effort. And we as a firm, and one great thing about Capital Factory is to kind of lean in through our advisory program into like really providing our entire 75-person team, all the work that we do as an ecosystem, really to provide that time and effort on behalf of our portfolio companies. So it really was a really, really great match in sort of the way that we work and sort of in the sort of orientation that I have. The other interesting kind of thread that I bring to the table is that, I'm a technical guy. So I'm a PhD. I can understand the chemistry. I can understand, the biotech. I can understand the hard tech. I've been in lab. I've made stuff. So that kind of like investigator, PhD, inventor, discoverer kind of mindset is something else also that I bring to the table. The nuance is that I know the value of research and how important it is to write a paper and how important it is to have a publication and to have potentially patents and to move a research program forward, because I've done that. But I also know the difference between a research program and a viable business. And so that's the other aspect of the tenor of sort of the way in which I engage, is that I understand when something is some really fantastic science that could be a business, or fantastic tech that probably isn't a business, but that is a nice tech. And then lastly, I'm the very first person to tell you that not everyone should do VC as an investment. It is the most expensive form of capital that you will ever have in running your business. The expectations for VCs is that, we're taking other people's money and we're promising them their return will be higher than any other kind of form of investment that they could make, either in the public markets or through real estate or whatever else that they know. Like we're promising superior returns. And so those exits, the only time we get paid is when there's an exit. So those exits have to be huge. I mean, because we invest kind of seed Series A. So you're looking after markets that are at minimum measured in hundreds of millions, but you're looking at billion-dollar, trillion-dollar markets. How are you going to be
Mhm.
the top player? How will you win? So, like,
Mhm.
unless you're building an analogy that I like to use for founders is like, unless you're building a rocket ship, which is $100 million plus company, if you're not building that, then VC is probably not the right investor pool for
Right.
you. And so if
Right.
you're building $1 million company, a tens of $1 million company, like that's fantastic. There's lots of great ways of doing that. There's great other additional sources of capital, but
Mhm.
the kind of juice worth the squeeze for a VC, like that's not the right kind of level of return. And so that's sometimes hard for some founders, especially technical
Mhm.
founders, because like this is really, really great. And okay, what's the total market?
Right.
It's $20 million. It's like, okay, like that is not enough for a VC. Oh, but it's growing at this CAGR. It's like, yes. So you're assuming that you're going to take all of the market, a majority of the market, and you're going to help fuel that CAGR, and that someone else who's an incumbent or a large enterprise
Mhm.
or who's got more resources than you do and already has a brand and already has a place isn't gonna like outcompete you.
Right.
So
Right.
that there's a lot of factors there. So I don't want to say I'm negative on VC because I'm definitely not, but part of the conversation I have with founders is like, well, let's talk about your ambition and let's talk about the real expectations of what it will take to do that. Because
Right.
it's not only big market, founders underestimate or don't take into consideration velocity or how fast
Right.
you're going. And
Right.
so for VC, lifetime of fund is typically about 10 years. You're hoping for an exit within ideally 5 to 7, 3 to 5.
Mhm.
You want those
Mhm.
exits in place at that level of magnitude that I told you.
Mhm.
So if you're not going to build a $100 million, billion-dollar company in 7 years and
Right.
you're not executing at that speed, well, then you're probably not a match for VC either.
Right.
And
So it's not just the total addressable market, it is absolutely the speed at which you can address it
the
and
speed that you
where
execute.
in the fund you are, right? Like, so if you're like partway through the fund, that time frame may be even more compressed than an investment that you make earlier on after you've raised your fund.
And as a VC, right? I mean, we've placed bets 3 years ago.
Hmm.
We've placed bet 2 years ago. We placed bet 10 years ago. And
Hmm.
we'd like to double down on those. And we know them
Hmm.
because we helped invest in
Hmm.
them and we've gotten to know them. So you're new. It doesn't mean you're not special, but
Hmm.
like when it comes to that allocation of capital, I have a choice of either doubling down on an early investment that I've made. I've
Hmm.
got the opportunity to invest in a new company. And yes, you want to be
Right.
keeping new companies in, but there is that dynamic where speed is really, really super important. And I do
Right.
think that sort of like graduate school, where like you're kind of passing your quals and you're in year 3, and it's like, oh, I'll get my PhD at some point, and we'll see. Sometimes early stage founders kind of like lull into that kind of
Hmm.
well, we're still kind of at early stages. We're still kind of building. Like, it's just going to take us time. It's like, well, that's great, but the clock is ticking. And so
Right.
velocity is a
And
really important factor.
And capital investment is really for something where throwing more money at something will actually accelerate when you get there. And so it makes a lot of sense. So the timing has to be right, both for the company and for your fund. So you might pass on a great investment that another investor invests in just because the timing didn't work. You guys
Yeah.
needed an exit before they'd be able to exit, even if there was a lot of potential for making money. It's like, but not on our time frame, so and
And well,
it's
the other thing I think founders need to understand is that for you, it's your company and you're shopping your opportunity to lots of investors, which is great. As an
Mhm.
investor, I'm getting hundreds of opportunities
Mhm.
a week, a month.
Right.
So you're not competing against other diagnostic companies or the biotech companies. Like just broadly, you're competing against all the deals that I've seen that day, or
Yeah.
that I've seen that week, or that I've seen that month, or that I've seen that quarter.
Right.
And that's just me. There might be other people on our team that are also sourcing. And then
Hmm.
we have to make a case within our investment committee about why, amongst all the best deals that we're looking at that quarter, or all the best deals that we're looking at that month, however it is that it's divided, why you're the one who's going to get that one check, or why the three of you are
Right.
going to get three checks and the other 15 or the other 10 or the other 20 or 30, whatever that number is, we're going to take a pass on it. And
Right.
so you're being evaluated across the surface area of which that firm is exploring. So you can improve your chances because you're only looking at firms that only look at your specific niche, which is good. The challenge is that you're looking and competing against everything else against that niche. And I think
Right.
with where we are today in the current cycle in 2025, this is one of the big differences that I've seen in the last 25 years. Well, there's lots of differences. One of the bigger differences now, especially coming out of COVID, is that there's an expectation that companies have been incredibly capital efficient. And so,
Hmm.
like friends and family dollars, personal investments you've made into the company, like what have you done with the company, with someone else's money or your own money that's gotten you to this point? How capital efficient have you been? And if
Hmm.
all you say is, well, we filed the patent and we got a C Corp set up, that's very different from we did a C Corp, we did a patent, we're in 7 pilots, we have got some
Hmm.
recurring revenue that's come on in. I've convinced
Right.
7 to 8 other people to join my company to be part of that effort. We're accelerating it all effort. That's what you're being competitive against. So I think it's really important to understand that in this moment, capital efficiency is king, and we want to
Hmm.
see how well you are and efficient with what you've been given already or what you've put in
Right.
on your own already. And some of that could be non-dilutive grants as well. That's super important,
Right.
right? So non-dilutive
Right.
grants, SBIRs, STTRs, winning pitch competitions, right? Like how have you been capital efficient with what you've been given to date? Because I'm giving you some money now. We're having the risk of giving you some money. I want to be sure that you're efficient with that cash as well. So
Right.
to amplify what you just said, I'm less interested in building rockets, unless you're actually really building rockets. I'm much more interested in paying for rocket fuel once your rockets beginning to take off the tower, right? It's because it
Right.
accelerates. So capital efficiency
Right.
is second is that especially in the software side, but this is also happening as well on the hardware side as we have 3D additive manufacturing being at a scale where it is today. Um, the time to product, the time in your product development and in your developing that code, especially with AI, has just gotten shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So, when
Hmm.
you ask the questions like, what have you done in the last 3 months? Um, how you answer that question today with what the output is very different than what have you done in the
Hmm.
last 3 months 20 years ago or even 10 years
Right.
ago. The
Right.
pace
Right.
acceleration of product development, of writing code on the software side, of product development, developing prototypes on the 3D additive manufacturing side for hardware, printing out circuit boards, like that process is just so much faster. And so the speed to actual real product has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter,
Right.
and the expectations are high with the capital efficiency. The other difference I think
I'm
that's critically important for people, for founders to understand is that, and it's not your fault, because of those two factors, the expectations for what investors have for earlier and earlier stage companies is a far higher bar than it was 10 years ago, than it was 5 years ago, than it was 20 years ago. So some companies benchmark and they say, oh, compared to this company 5 years ago, here's the expectations. We've met those same expectations. It's like, what you don't know is that the goalposts have moved and you still haven't met that mark.
right.
And so the expectations for traction, product development, competitive advantage, team, those goalposts have shifted where more is being expected for companies every stage, particularly those that
Right.
are earlier stage as well.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think one of the things that we've been working on at Daybreak Labs, and you just gave a great lunch and learn on this and how to get funding and customers through dual use military applications, is the significance of having actual customers, right?
Yes.
Whether it's through letters of commitment, letters of intent, pilot studies, as you said, they're putting resources, maybe not money, but they're putting resources into deploying your technology. And so much of the progress, it's clear that even for early stage companies, that is required as evidence that you have set up some very clear paths to revenue, even if you work in a tightly regulated industry. I have to wait for FDA approval. In and of itself, that's not an answer, right? That's while you're waiting, what are you doing? Where are your lines to revenue? And can you demonstrate that with actual commitments? What's the proof in your story? Which companies? Who have you talked to? What are you doing with them now? And I think that was probably always true, but I think to your point, what we're seeing is it's even more true earlier. So,
Yes. It's even
so
more true.
even for that first check where people were supposed to be really accepting a lot of technical risk, it's like, yeah, we'll take it maybe, but only because we see your path to revenue. Otherwise, you know, we'd rather invest in a company that's closer to revenue.
Yeah, and I think for technical founders, especially first-time technical founders, um, you think the only risk that's out there is technical, right? And I can do
Right.
that, right? You know, like I'm an engineer. I can engineer this problem, or I'm a biologist. Like I can biology out of this, and that's great. Like I trust that you're super smart and can solve the technical risk. There's a whole bunch of other risk involved that I have to take into consideration. There's execution risk. There's business risk. There's obviously competitive, advantage and risk from the competitors. And I can't tell you how many founders I've met with who said, "I've got no competition." It's like, no, that's not true. Yeah, I mean, you do. No, 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 no. Like, there's no one else in this space that's doing what we do. It's like, fine, great. Who's adjacent to your space? Because if they see the same opportunity you do and they're kind of adjacent, that they just got to add cinnamon to their special sauce, and that they've discovered your recipe, right? Or there's the status quo. And
Right.
that's now not only do you have the risk of being the adopted solution, but because it's the status, what the status quo is, there's an educational kind of component that you've got to do to convince people how to do things. People do things a new way, or to incorporate into their process or their workflow in a very unique way. So I think for technical founders, like really evaluating the additional risks that they have to sort of help have a path forward for is really important. And
Mhm.
it becomes even more difficult when you're working in biotech or medical devices, where you've got regulatory risk and you've got clinical risk on top of it. I was fortunate. I joke with our team, I kind of cut my teeth in like the hardest part, which is because not only is there technical risk, not only is there kind of business risk, but there's also regulatory risk and there's clinical risk. And I've seen my share of clinical assets that have failed at phase 2 and phase 3 and post launch, and there are graveyards littered with those failures. Some of that stuff's kind of out of your control. And so, as an investor, especially at the earliest stages, you've got to account all of that risk. And so, team's really important. And what have you done to kind of achieve on your own the de-risking of some of those various processes? Grants is a huge part of that. It helps de-risk some of that. Um, Programs like the kind of programs that you run help do that as well. Um, but just coming out and saying I'm a graduate of this program and I got a patent and I got a C corp, like in the current marketplace, it's got to be really, really different. Or it's got to be the trend that everyone's very excited about, in order for you to really kind of unlock that value.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you've really jumped into a lot of the, sort of key takeaways for any founders that are in our audience, particularly here in the Tri Valley. And I do just kind of want to bring it back a little bit to Capital Factory, so it's something in common that Capital Factory has with what we're doing through Startup Tri-Valley, Daybreak Labs, and iGate. There's a regional focus.
Yeah.
And there's also a national focus with Capital Factory. So there's a sort of, which we don't have. So we are very focused on creating economic vibrancy here in the Tri-Valley, and with no aspirations to scaling that to the rest of the country. Capital Factory is also has a regional focus in bringing economic vibrancy to the state of Texas, and sees a path to doing that by having a national focus, or at least having a national presence. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And you guys already invest in a Livermore company, American Bifurcated Systems. They're just like the next building over from us at Daybreak Labs. And and we have your actual investment of time and looking at deal flow coming from Daybreak Labs and being an advisor. And so can you talk a little bit about how this plays, maybe it's not just a personal philosophy, but also into Capital Factory's thesis and philosophy, and how you see that bringing kind of a unique advantage to our Tri-Valley startup community?
So a little history, and then we'll get to the specific answer. We're a very unique investment firm. Like we're a very unique model, and it's a model that's kind of grown out of the last sort of 16 years of the way in which we do the work that we do. We exist to address the critical holy trinity that's important for startups, which is startups need investors, startups need customers, and startups need talent. So we are singularly focused at being the center of gravity that helps bring together entrepreneurs and connect them to their next investor, their next customer, and their next hire. We started 16 years ago as the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Austin, Texas. Our founder, Josh Baer, had the vision, which was bold in 2009. So when I was out, like moving off to go do something else, academia, he planted his flag in Austin, Texas, and said, look, the future of startups and the future of venture capital is not going to be in Boston, New York. It's not going to be in Silicon Valley. It's going to be this little town called Austin, Texas. And so it was really the focus of the center of gravity for entrepreneurship in Austin. And so we've been part of the growing tech ecosystem, VC growth in Austin since our inception. And in many cases, it started in our walls. They met at a conference. They met over coffee. We connected the people together. Like we've been part of that growth since our inception. In 2017, we announced what we call our Texas Manifesto, which is like, hey, like Silicon Valley is not a city, it's a region. And some will argue whether or not, Tri-State is within that region or not within that region, right? So it's a
Tri-Valley,
region.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Region.
Right.
So can we get people to think about Texas as one big city? And so Capital
Mhm.
Factory will serve as that connective tissue for startups, for venture capital in Dallas, in Austin, in Houston, and in San Antonio, the sort of Texas triangle, where a majority of Texas's population is, majority of industry, majority of business. Like, can we kind of unlock that? And there's already some very natural kind of talent flows here in Texas. People have family members or their kids or, in Austin or they're in Houston, they're in Dallas. Like there's just a lot of cross connect. A lot of the networks are kind of there. But we've been intentionally kind of building that across the state of Texas. That was our focus from about 2017, in part because of sort of the work that we had done. The U.S. Army, as they were looking to establish their next presence, chose Austin, Texas for their base for Army Futures Command. And that really, for us, really accelerated what had traditionally been just a focus on sort of B2B SaaS and sort of a little bit of sort of CPG to really embrace really fully hard tech. We'd done a couple of sort of opportunistic investments in hard tech and biotech prior to that moment, but this really kind of accelerated that growth. And so we have in our headquarters in Austin, Army Applications Lab and Army Futures Command, DIU, AFWorks, SpaceWorks, MarineX, National Geospatial, U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the Defense Health Agency, a whole range of other federal partners that are in that space. And so we've got program managers and program officers that are there helping companies connect with federal opportunities, primarily through SBIR's TTRs, but also in a range of additional kind of contracting kind of opportunities. And so that for us really accelerated an interest and a focus for us across deep tech and hard tech. We now have a space portfolio and an aerospace portfolio and a cybersecurity portfolio and a whole range of really interesting tech and part of that. And so it was part of that kind of like center of gravity in Texas with this dual use component that had other companies reaching out to us and be like, I really need you to connect into Texas. I'm from California. I hear Texas is interesting, but I don't know the players yet. I don't know the region yet, or the people over my federal partners tell me to talk to you guys because you've got this incredible network of investors. Like, how do we connect into what's happening? And so we've really kind of served as a kind of hyper connector. And then intentionally, then with the launch of our Station DC office in Washington, DC, have been looking kind of to bridge that kind of nationally. And so we changed our positioning from the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Austin and the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas to the center of gravity for entrepreneurs outside of Silicon Valley. And it's been exciting to see how we're not an economic development group. We're investing. Oh, you should be in the best place for you to build as a founder. So yes, please build in Livermore, right? That's the best place for you to be, right? Awesome.
Right.
We can help unlock Texas for you so that you begin to engage and get stronger, faster, quicker. We can help unlock what really interesting opportunities there are available in Texas. Or alternatively, we can also help kind of unlock the opportunities around dual use, or both, And because we're now at a point where we have 750 companies in our portfolio, including 8 of Texas's 20 unicorns. We've got, $275 million under assets under management and above. I mean, we're not the largest investor in Texas by all means. We don't have the most assets under management, but we write a lot of small checks. And a lot of those companies are like now second-time founders in our ecosystem, building their second or third company with us. They've gone through an IPO. They've gone through M&A activity. So we've got that in our community, that muscle memory of being able to work with companies from very early stages to now sort of later stages. We started as an accelerator and then shifted because lots of accelerators started popping up and did that work really successfully, to now kind of really focus on that kind of seed Series A as companies are beginning to engage their first round of institutional investors. And that really is something that's kind of special we bring to the table.
And I know what distinguished you and Capital Factory to me is so just for context for our listeners, you were basically just helping me out because you were like 10 chapters ahead of me in the book, maybe on to the next series of the book series, and a lot of the advice you were giving me was related more to organizationally, how do I get these outcomes? But in talking to you, I think one of the things that I learned is that Capital Factory was one of very few sort of generalist funds that was still investing in hard tech at a time when we were seeing generalist funds, even regionally, say, capital efficiency. And most, I would say most Bay Area generalist funds. So if your whole thesis was hard tech, climate tech, that didn't change with the change in interest rates and the lack of exits, or life sciences, actual pharma, medical devices, et cetera. Okay, nothing changed for those investors, but everyone else who was, throwing a bone to like, it's a pretty I mean, it's not, we don't really do this, but kind of to your point, maybe they don't have the other resources but money, but they were interested. It does sound like a good idea. We like the idea of having something in cardiac technology, but none of us know anything about it. But, you seem like a good investment. All of those opportunities just completely dried up in 2022, 2023, and everything became capital efficiency. Capital Factory is very unique in the fact that you've had the option to just stay tech and you haven't. Do you think that's because of your relationship with the military that's allowed you to do more, or is there something else driving that? And how is it paying off?
So, we're a very unique organization. We've got like 70 plus professionals in our team that help kind of like power the platform. And within the
Hmm.
venture team, we're about 20 professionals within specifically the venture side of the work that we do. Um, so some of that has just been we're founder focus, and it
Hmm.
really is about the sort of unique insight that we believe that technology at its core will be the solution for many of the world's problems. And so let's
Hmm.
find really cool tech that's going to help solve big problems. And so it's really that's been
Hmm.
our guiding philosophy in the way in which we think about things. So that allows us to kind of like look very broadly at the kind of work that
Right.
we do. And so because of the way in which we do, and it's lots of really, really small checks, like we can take lots of like really crazy bets, So someone walks into our space and says, I'm gonna go land on the moon. And we're like, cool,
Right.
let's go figure that out, and
Right.
and then they land on the moon. Literally, we've got two of our
Right.
portfolio companies,
Right.
the two commercial companies that have landed on the moon. Or,
That's
hey,
great.
look, I really think in the future, we're gonna have humanoid robotics, and like they're gonna take over the world, and they're gonna do all the jobs that are dirty and dangerous and dull, and like that's gonna be awesome. And we're like, cool. Like I can imagine what the world looks like with robots. Like robots could be super cool, and so
Right. Right.
we've been part of
Right.
that growth. So a lot of it is about fundamentally backing really great founders that have got
Mm-hmm.
really interesting tech that's solving
Mm-hmm.
really hard problems. And so it started, and I have to give our partners credit for this. It really is about maintaining that as our focus. First kind of starting with what everyone knew as our partners and sort of B2B SaaS and software to then take the risk of then expanding into hard tech and biotech and medical devices to now like we're really interested in like really way out crazy kind of things of what the future would look like in 30 years or 20 years.
Right.
Because, we've seen
Right.
that movie already in some of the investments that we've made. And
Hmm.
it has been exciting to kind of see that grow. So that's part of it. The other part is like we're Texas. And so it's like, hey, we're just going to be different in a lot of ways. To answer your question about why you guys and why Livermore, or the tri-state, the Tri-Valley area,
Tri-Valley.
Tri-Valley,
Tri-Valley.
um, it has to do with a bias that I have.
Hmm.
My bias is I have seen and had colleagues out of the national labs and the great technology and talent that comes out of those national labs. I've collaborated and had partners and at Los Alamos and at Sandia. I was fortunate to be part of a review committee and engagement with Pacific Northwest Labs. Um, Known folks at Argonne for a long time, Brookhaven, Oak Ridge, Idaho. So as we started having the conversation about like, well, look, Lawrence Livermore is like literally right there, and Sandia is right there, and there's some really great
Hmm.
opportunities there and great talent.
Hmm.
Let's see where this kind of goes because we know what that looks like looking at universities. We've worked with UT, we work with Texas A&M, we've worked with Rice. Like
Hmm.
we see the output of the university kind of ecosystem around innovation. We're excited about kind of the unlock that happens around the national labs. And yes, a lot of it's around security and a lot of it's around
Hmm.
but energy is
Right.
a good example of a driving force. We don't have enough electrons, full stop, to do
Hmm.
anything. And
Hmm.
so we need to
Hmm.
find all hands on deck to get more electrons. And so,
Right.
yes, there's generation, but there's also transmission and there's also storage and there's also
Yep.
efficiencies around the current electrons that we currently have. And then there's ways in which we make those electrons or the hardware more efficient or the software more efficient. And so, my God, like I hear there's really smart people that have been thinking about energy for a super long time. And so, and it's not just, oil and gas, it's fusion and it's fission and it's, wind and it's solar. And it really is this kind of all hands on deck to kind of solve those energy problems. And then, you know, we're big, we're very bullish on space. We're going to solve a lot of terrestrial problems.
Mm-hmm.
Problems will exist off world. And so,
Right.
how do we solve those problems in low Earth orbit and higher orbits? And we think about lunar, if we think about planetary, like there's a whole range of unlock there that opens up
Mm-hmm.
for us to think about ag tech, to open up to think about. So
Right.
we're very broad in the kind of work that we do. And again, with our focus as sort of helping be the center of gravity outside of the valley, like, yeah, like we'd love to engage ecosystems across the United States and help kind of work on kind of linking them together. And we're very fortunate to have federal partners like DARPA and
Mm-hmm.
AFWorks and those folks that we've been partnering with for a number of years, specifically in the dual use space. We think there's opportunities in energy, and we think there's opportunities in biotech, and we think there's opportunities in healthcare. And so the ways in which that intellectual capital is driving innovation is something that for us is not only a guiding principle, but something that for us is exciting. And then the other component that I think is the unsaid theme of our
Mm-hmm.
today, relational. This is
Right.
relational business. Venture startups is a relational business. That warm
Mm-hmm.
intro, who you know, who you can make that connection to, who can provide that insight, that kind of hackneyed phrase, your net worth is your network, is kind of is real.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
we had a personal connection because we've known each other for a long time, and you reached out and we continue that personal connection. Like this is a relational based business. And so
Right.
if we can help be that connective tissue and engage
Mm-hmm.
those systems, obviously in and within Texas, but also outside of Texas is our base. We see kind of a great opportunity to really back incredible founders that are building bold things that are solving real world problems. That for us is really exciting.
And we really appreciate your support. I mean, I know personally, consulting you as I was beginning as executive director, and really trying to understand how to most effectively use the limited resources we had has been so valuable. And you gave me a lot of advice initially on our advisory network. Now you're one of our advisors, not just to me, but to our companies. And that also came about, I think, in part because you were starting to see deal flow.
Yeah.
Like I'm bringing companies to you, and there are companies that match your thesis. Maybe you won't invest in every single one, but it's clearly, at least a couple times there's reasons to have at least a second and third conversation.
Nice.
And I think for our founders, there's a recognition that they're not going to coming back to your capital efficiency, they're not going to be able to build a company fast enough that captures the opportunity they think is there. If they're only looking at their source of relationships and network and company, uh, their company building model as being only regional. So
Correct.
you can be
Correct.
a regional company, you can be Tri-Valley, through and through, and you are maybe going to collaborate with another a hospital like MD Anderson, or
Yes.
if you're in green tech, taking advantage of what's being built in Houston around climate technology, and what's existing in Chicago, and what's going on in Boston, and even in the North Carolina Tri-Cities. And somewhere in there, you might do your manufacturing somewhere that doesn't even have it's not any of these places, right? Because Ohio gave you a really sweet deal. And
Oklahoma.
I think yeah, Oklahoma. And I think the reality is, if you're serious about building your business, you kind of need to make a lot of, like you said, you need to make a lot of strategic relationships across the US, globally,
Fully.
wherever it's going to actually fuel the growth of your company. Because if you are an investable company, then you need to grow quickly, and you can't really afford to make a single location the thing that's gatekeeping you, right? And even though we have so many resources here in the
Yeah.
Tri-Valley, in
Yes.
the Tri-Valley, but also in the Bay Area, but it's still not necessarily going to be sufficient. Things may not line up. You've got to think of your timing, and who can match your timing as much as anything else. And I think for us, that's what working with Capital Factory unlocks is a much more these warm introductions in all the places where you've built relationships. So I know we're super appreciative of that. I'm really curious. I know you've worked with a few of our companies.
Yeah.
I'm very curious, we talk a lot. I'm curious what you see as sort of the, I'm gonna use a word that's used a lot in Bender. Someone just really pointed out to me that it sounds kind of mean, but it's not mean. What do you see as the unfair advantages we're giving each other by Capital Factory investing essentially your time in the Tri-Valley, and us working with Capital Factory? Like, you've seen the region. I'm curious to see what you see as some unfair advantages that maybe we should be capitalizing on, and how potentially this relationship can help what you guys are building.
So let me frame that slightly. I was fortunate to go to graduate school in Boston and be engaged in that startup ecosystem in the 90s. Fortunate to, as part of the consulting firm work that I did, be in California. So I've worked on both Northern and Southern California in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I know what those ecosystems look like when they're churning and burning, right? But I've also been fortunate through the consulting work that I did to work with other emerging ecosystems, Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, and Miami, and Denver, and Boulder, and Salt Lake City, and Seattle, and Austin, and Houston, and Dallas, and Chicago. Places like Detroit, and Cleveland, right? Vancouver, London, Dublin, Berlin, Madrid, Barcelona, Paris. And so I think there's a bias to only look to New York and Boston and only look towards San Francisco and be like, that's where it is. And yes, that's where capital is concentrated. That's where startups are concentrated. That's where you've got that natural critical mass. But there's lots of advantages in lots of other places in the world. And again, I ended up spending the last decade here in San Antonio. I'm working in Austin. I'm working nationwide with the work that we do as a firm. So I know what's it like to be in, forgive me for listeners in San Antonio, in being in a second tier city. And so now back to the advantages. So I think there are always advantages that are geographically tied. One of San Antonio's advantages is that it is Austin's southernest most suburb. So we're very close to, similar to the tri-state, the Tri-Valley is
Tri-Valley, yeah, we're like the easternmost. We're the eastern rim of the Bay Area.
not a real synergy I see between sort of my experience in San Antonio and working with
Yeah.
Austin that you all have with
Yep.
Daybreak, what's happening in actually the Bay Area. So like there's a lot of advantages that are there. What I've learned here in San Antonio as well is that, like, we've got incredible talent, just incredible talent. Some of it's fueled by the universities. A lot of it's fueled around hospitality. A lot of it's fueled around military. So we really do have this incredible kind of talent pool. And we've got legacies of SaaS companies, service-based companies, tech companies that have spun out and done great things, that have been sort of the history of what's happening here in San Antonio. So why you all and why Tri-Valley? Number one, I think there's great, incredible talent that's there. A lot of it is fueled by the national labs, and that's fantastic. A lot of it is fueled by, again, your proximity to the Bay Area and affordability, work-life balance, access and ease into getting into wine country and the agricultural kind of center of what's happening there. I'm excited about your partnerships that you're having with UC Merced as well. Like, I think there's some really interesting talent advantages that you have that are very unique. Second is geography, as I mentioned before. You're in the valley, but not quite in the valley. You're the next valley over, right? You're
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in, it's easy to get out. There's a critical mass of density of startups and investors that are there in the place. But also, in addition to kind of the industry that's fueled through the national labs and the history that's there, there's a history of diagnostics and medical devices that have come out of that space and healthcare that makes it really different, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
is it MD Anderson in Houston? No, but it's unique. It's unique.
We do, yeah. And it is true because we have 4 hospital systems in the
You
Tri-Valley.
have these hospital
And
systems, so thinking about
yeah.
healthcare broadly, healthcare
Mm-hmm.
system is important.
Right.
The opportunities in ag for you all are actually really interesting in ag tech as well. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, it's I believe one of your premier agricultural outputs as a state is like really
Right.
nearby, right? So
Right.
I think,
Yeah.
I mean, this is not Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, or
Right.
Kansas City, Missouri, or College
Mm-hmm.
Station, Texas, right? This
Right.
is with these other advantages in ag, with this additional kind of critical mass opportunities around tech. Um, with ag and with where you are geographically, climate's
Mm-hmm.
important, water usage is important, energy
Right.
is important. So there's some really interesting kind of advantages to place that are unique to the work that you do that are super exciting. So there's talent and there's place. Third,
Yeah.
some cool tech, you know?
Right.
Yeah, some of it's super, some of it's farther along, already had exit. There's already a sort of an advantage with some
Mm-hmm.
really cool tech coming out. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a tax to be spent about taking that tech and then moving into San Francisco, or taking that tech and moving into Boston, or taking that tech and moving
Mm-hmm.
to New York. I understand there's also that same kind of tax going into Texas. People
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to sometimes like live where they are, or live where they have family,
Right.
or where they have kids. And
Right.
so
Right.
taking advantage of sort of that synergy of both tech and location, or tech and opportunity, I think is an interesting combination.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we've helped kind of arbitrage with the work that we've done in Houston, and the work that we've done in Dallas, the work we've done in San Antonio, the work we're doing in Austin, the work we're doing with other kind of ecosystems. For example, the great work our team is doing in DC right now. Um, we've got a sense of what that playbook looks like. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're interested in engaging the ecosystems to do that more broadly. Four, we have a whole state of Texas you guys get an opportunity to engage in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, oh my goodness, I get to engage in California, the Bay Area.
Right.
That's cool. That's amazing. But what does this look like in Texas as well?
Mm-hmm.
And so that opportunity to think about, are there two places where I can have my customers? Are there two places I can have my pilots? Are there, and what's really interesting about Texas is that we're super bullish on space. And so there's places to launch rockets. There's places to build rockets. There's places to test rockets all over the state of Texas. And it's not
Right.
just what Elon is doing down in Boca Chica.
Right.
It's Port of Houston, and it's actually in Midland, and it's in El Paso, and it's all over the state. And we've got this little state, group called the Texas Space Commission, which is investing in space. We've got a small group called CPRIT, which is a state initiative. Similar to how California has a state initiative around stem cells, or used to have one around stem cells, we have one specifically towards cancer. And it is the second largest funder of cancer research, second to the National Cancer Institute.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're doing another one in neurodegenerative disease as well. So the opportunities for companies to sort of engage in broadly with another state, and the way that our companies have an opportunity to then engage then in adjacent to the valley, is for us, I think, an exciting synergy. So we'll see how this plays out. I'd love for us to have a recap podcast, like how the last 5 years been,
Yes.
how the last 3 years been, and be able to have a recap about what we hope are the seeds that we plant in this kind of like season take flourish. But we're very bullish about sort of these ecosystems and what we help bring to the table. And I think one of the critical issues that I think is missing is this concept of critical mass. And you have critical mass.
Mhm.
You have critical in San Francisco, like there's nothing like it in the entire world. Like you'll be at a
Mhm.
you'll be at a coffee shop and someone's three co-founders are coding and building stuff. Eight investors are taking meetings. Like you're meeting big tech people. Like that critical mass of just running into people is part of the reason
Mhm.
San Francisco is really special and why it will always be the leader in the United States for what we have around tech and investment in VC. Similar density issues in Boston, very focused
Mhm.
around biotech and life sciences as well, but we've got a similar density in
Mhm.
Boston, similar density in New York.
Mhm.
Everything else is up for grabs. And so
Right.
we're building that density in Austin, but we think broadly within sort of our ecosystem and the communities in which we're engaging with, we can help build that all-inclusive one-stop shop ecosystem where
Mhm.
you're in the Tri Valley, you're engaging with investors or stakeholders in Washington, D.C. You've got pilots and investors and partners in Houston and in Dallas, in addition to what you're already doing in San Francisco. We've got a connection with someone in Seattle, or we're engaging with some folks from
Mhm.
Korea or from Australia. So, like the ways in which I think COVID has changed the world to make it much more flat has been advantageous
Mhm.
for venture and tech broadly. It's made,
Mhm.
these kind of virtual distributed hybrid teams where, you're a team of eight, but only one person lives in one city and the rest of the eight are living in seven different cities as part
Right.
of the solution. It doesn't mean people shouldn't be working together. People should be working together. There is something about the in-office kind of collision
Yeah,
idea
there is.
important.
Right.
No amount of Zoom call, all hands is going to solve that, or one-on-ones is going to solve for that. But we are seeing a greater awareness of those kinds of ways, and so like we're bullish on America. We're bullish on tech. We're bullish on the ways in which technology will help solve some of the problems that it's both created, as well as some of the problems that
Mhm.
that technology can help be the solution for.
That's great. I mean, I think your optimism and the path that you see for the future and the way we can just capitalize on what's already happened, right? Like you said, COVID flattened things. There's a lot going on right now that makes it harder to source everything in one location. And a lot of the barriers to sourcing things, whether it's capital, talent, connections across the United States, like through the 2009 initial inception and subsequent investments of companies like Capital Factory. It's like a lot of these connections have been made, and it sounds to me like what you are seeing is, we have a moment of time where we can capitalize on it, and this is a good timing, right? And
And there's
um,
geopolitical and macroeconomic forces that are helping shape this acceleration as well.
right,
It used
right,
to be you could get away with, oh, we're doing manufacturing in China. Yeah, you can't
right.
do that anymore for lots of
Right, right, everything's changed.
yeah.
Yeah, everything's changed. And and there's but it's, not just Capital Factory, there's been a lot of investment kind of in the meantime to create these connections, and I know I feel really fortunate to have a gateway to that, outside the Bay Area connection to capital, to resources, to all the things that are really necessary to scale companies through you and Capital Factory. And I'm just curious. I want to, be mindful of the time and everything. You've left us with so many great nuggets. Is there something I didn't ask? that you really wanted to leave our listeners with?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad we've got another hour on the pod. Uh, yeah, let me come through a couple of them, and some of them come out of the mentoring sessions I've had with some of your teams. So they're kind of grounded in those conversations, and some of it will come out of some other mentoring and some other conversations I've had with folks, not necessarily at Daybreak. The first is number one, you can't do this by yourself. You just can't. You just can't. Yeah, there's lots of advantages to being a solo founder. However, what happens when you get hit by a bus? That's a risk as an investor.
Right. Right.
So, there's a general bias towards teams, founding teams, as opposed to solo founders.
Mhm.
And that's not only a risk mitigation factor. I tell companies all the time, if you can't convince somebody to join you on this pirate quest with you, either as a co-founder or as an advisor, where either they're going to work for this for free, or they're going to work for this for free and put their own dollars into the opportunity, you will never land a customer or a
Mhm.
partner.
Mhm.
So can I get it? Can I form a team together is an important proxy for those skill sets in a venture and as a
Mhm.
founder. So
Mhm.
entrepreneurship is a team sport. I'm not saying you have to go
Mm.
off and get a co-founder tomorrow if you're a um, solo founder. I mean, that's in some ways is actually even more involved than getting married. So like, you don't choose your life mate. I mean, some people do go to Vegas after 24 hours and like, boom, we're married, but like most people don't do that. So like, it is a process of trying to figuring out who your co-founders might be. But remember, like, you don't have to be co-founders. They can be employees, right? You can
Mhm.
hire people. So like, how it is that you form that team is critically important. So team is an important factor. We talked about velocity. That's another important factor. Third, or second, story.
Mm.
Story is really important. Story. And as part of that story, you better really be in love with the problem. Many, primarily technical founders, but I think that founders overall have this general kind of blinder bias that because it's their baby, because it's their tech, because it's their product, they know it's the best solution for X. And so they're in love
Mhm.
with the product, or they're in love with their technology, or they're in love with their invention or their tech. And they're not as in love with the problem that it's supposed to solve.
Right.
As part of that story, you have to convey your love for that problem that exists and that you are singularly focused on solving the problem that people are willing to pay you for, as opposed
Mhm.
to developing this really cool tech that you've discovered that people may or may not want. Right. So
Right.
story is important. How you weave that story about why you care, how you weave that story about why you did what you did, how you weave that story about how you brought these people together to make this thing happen, how you weave the story about like what your goals and objectives are. But it should be singularly focused on sort of like solving that problem is a really important component. Number three, with the problem comes understanding the customer or the user.
Mhm.
And so you should be really focused on your customer. You should be really focused on your user. And, discovery, customer discovery is unending. You never stop customer discovery. Customer discovery is not, I went through NSFI Core and interviewed 30 people. It is not, I went through Steve Blank's program and I interviewed 100 people and I've got my lean canvas and done my business. Like, that's not, yes, that is some discovery, but Customer discovery is a constant process for every startup, right? Steve Blank defined
Mm,
startups as a temporary organization designed to find a scalable and sustainable business model. So you're always trying to figure out what that business model is and how you're going to scale. And then once you kind
mhm,
of done that as a business, you're still engaging with customers. This is why we've got customer success positions, right? This is why we have sales. And so this aspect of customer engagement and customer discovery is critically important because the world changes and their needs change and how they buy change and what the options are in the marketplace change and you as a company change. So you've got to constantly be driven by that customer discovery. Quick story. I was meeting with the founder last night at an event and he said, look, it would really mean to me if you download my app. And I'm like, fine, fine. And as I was downloading, I was like, you're not going to send me any spam, are you? And he's kind of like, I'll turn that off for you. It's like, great, I appreciate it. So signing up, right?
mhm,
Pause. And I'm like, and then go on and complete the sign up. Customer discovery. He's like, I noticed that you pause. I'm like, yeah. Like, I want to know why you want to ask for my birthday. And he's like, well, X, Y, and Z. I'm like, that's friction. You think it's a great idea. I just want your birthday. I said, look, if you want a date, ask a date. But you need to know my age. You actually don't even know my birthday. Why are you asking the birthday? He's like, well, we want to offer like, you know, incentives and bonuses on your birthday. I said, oh, well, that's different. You should tell me that because maybe then at that
mhm,
birthday, you don't need to know my age to know what the birthday is. I said,
right,
but what you want to do is you want me to honor like special events because you want to send me promotions around special dates that I celebrate. Why should
mhm,
my birthday? I mean, anniversaries, other people's birthdays, Valentine's
right,
Day, Father's Day, the opening of baseball season, the World Series, the Super Bowl. Like, why limit this to birthdays? And he was his mind was blown. But
mhm,
he wouldn't have had that conversation if he hadn't been engaging with customers and being focused
right,
on the discovery.
right, right, right,
So it
right,
is a constant process of that customer discovery. And you as the founder, this is maybe the fifth one. You as the founder, you have total control. Like you can decide whatever you want to do. Like you're the founder. I'm just some guy
right,
who might
right,
be providing capital, certainly is providing advice. You're free to reject everything I tell you. I'm just some rando that
right.
Yolanda connected me with, right? So you as a founder always have the deciding power to decide like the path that you go forward. So you can choose to take that customer discovery advice and say, no, I disagree. I don't think that's sort of what customers really want. Some of them, that's important for them, but they're not my customer. These are the people who are my customers. Others are like,
Right,
oh my goodness, I didn't know it was that friction. I was wondering why
right,
people weren't registering for my thing. Let me run an A/B test. What happens if I take that question off? Do I speed the process of signing on? Right. Or maybe I'll let people know why I'm asking for that information and, include it. So customer discovery is a constant process. You should always be engaging in, some of the best Fortune 500 companies, some of the best Fortune 10 companies, they're constantly talking to their customers all the time, every day. So build a real business around that. The next one, I forgot what number we're on, 5, 6. Build a real business.
build a real
Just
business.
build a real,
I love it.
real business. In some you've got beautiful tech, a really great science project. It's
Mhm,
it's beautiful. It's not a business. Why? It doesn't solve.
mhm,
Oh, but it does solve a problem. Here's the next one. The bar is not that you solve the problem. The bar is that you are 10 times better than the current solutions. not 20%, although in some cases 20% gives you better, right? There are these kind of instances where a marginal improvement makes a huge kind of cost gain or time gain or whatever. But like, are you 10x better than the other alternatives? Are you 20x better,
Right.
100x better than the current alternatives? And if you say there's no alternatives out there, that's not true. If you see an opportunity, other people will as well. And some of them will have more resources than you do, and all of them will have better talent than you do. So, how do you stay competitive? How will you be better? So, yes, it's got to be a real business, but it's also got to be better, like significantly better, like an order of magnitude better for it to build a scalable sort of business. Because,
Right.
if I'm big, whatever, sure, I can engineer out 20% efficiency or improvement. That's easy. That's called my next release. And I have, an installed user base. I've got a sales team. They know who my name is. I'm advertising nationally. Everyone knows who I am. Like, they're going to love the fact that I'm going to charge them the same amount of money. They're going to get 20% better. Or I'm going to give them 20% better. I'm going to charge them 50% more. Right. Like,
Right.
there are these advantages that
Right.
incumbents have. This is why they're incumbents. Like, that's why you've got to be better. The advantages that you have, aside from the incumbents, is that you can move faster. You can execute
Absolutely. Right.
faster.
Right.
So don't forget startups. Your advantage is, yes, tech, but it's really speed and being able to
Mhm.
move more quickly than large tech companies, large enterprises. This is the reason why many of those companies are
Right.
looking for startups, because they want to be able to go ahead and
Right.
make investments in those startups or do proof of concepts with their pilots to potentially either be a customer or eventually acquire you. So,
Right.
like, remember, your superpower is in part speed. And so executing quickly is critically important. And then lastly, um, be bold. Just be bold. Be bold. Be bold. Sometimes
I love that.
founders just
I
aren't
and
bold enough. And it's like,
right.
I only want to build for the, Tri Valley. It's like, what would this look like globally? It's like, man, like, that's just too big of a problem for me. It's like, people probably want this solution and insert other country or insert other state
Right.
or insert other
Right.
world, right? Like, be bold. It's like, oh, I don't know if I've got that ambition. It's like, oh, that's fine. Back to what I said before,
I
you as a founder have every right to say, I want to build a nice little business. That's not what VCs are interested in.
I love that. And it reminds me of something one of my former bosses and mentors used to say to me is everyone does a plan A, which is what they think will succeed, a plan B in case it doesn't. But very rarely do people make plan C,
Yeah.
which is it exceeds beyond your wildest dreams. And I just heard from another advisor that they were like, yeah, we went IPO on our plan C. Investors bought our plan C. So
I mean, as VCs, I want to see bold, crazy, like big scale.
bold crazy. I love it.
Yeah.
I think so
But
there's so many things.
why are you the team that's going to do this? Right. I
Right.
want to see bold, crazy, but lots of people have bold, crazy. Why are
Right.
you
Bold,
the one?
crazy, grounded in
Right?
reality.
How are you
Why
do
the
it? Why?
story, the believable, the plausible, bold, crazy story.
I mean, we've got cars driving by
So,
themselves on roads right now, right? Like
right,
we're gonna have
right,
we're gonna have flying
right,
cars soon. The flying cars we've been promised for
right.
years. Be bold,
Exactly.
crazy. Be bold, crazy. Vision.
Okay. Be bold, crazy. There are so many useful and inspiring things you've said today, Luis, but I love the idea of ending with be bold, crazy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much for being a Daybreak Labs advisor, for advising me, for helping our region, and for being on the pod today.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed getting a chance to have this conversation with you and be part of your community. I'm easy to find on all the socials, so people can feel free to reach out on all the channels that I'm easy to find. But super
And I will
excited.
put everything in the show notes.
Thanks. I'm super excited to continue to work with you guys and your teams, and excited about the seeds that we plant together.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gil.